writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business, coming to you from Kobo's headquarters in Toronto. Hey listeners, this is Chrissy Monroe, and I am super excited about this episode where I feature none other than a Kobo softball champion, Ben Dugas.
That's right, I'm a softball champion.
And our other colleague, I believe not a softball champion, but still quite esteemed nonetheless, Simon Collinson, both of whom are EPUB experts, but on different subjects, specific to that subject.
Yeah, Simon's a real expert on making EPUBs, and I'm an expert on seeing the million ways they can go wrong when you open them in an app.
Yeah, great summary. So in the episode, you are going to hear a lot of do's and don'ts, but mostly the don'ts.
Mostly the don'ts.
So if you are dealing with EPUBs, which if you are self-publishing eBooks, you are, you do not want to miss this episode.
And you may hear a bit of tension in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
I was told very specifically not to bring food into the room in written form. I neglected to heed that. I brought in food. Chrissy glared at me. I put it down. I didn't bring it in. So you don't hear me eating, but, if we sound like we're a bit at odds at the beginning, that's why.
Yeah, I think you absolutely can hear that tension. I'm not going to apologize because I give instructions and I expect people to follow them.
Yep.
Just like this episode, we're going to give you some instructions and we hope you'll listen. Today's episode is all about EPUBs. In a recent email exchange with a KWL author, my colleague Simon was able to teach some nitty-gritty EPUB advice, so I wondered what other knowledge might be living within Kobo's walls that could be especially useful for listeners trying to create beautiful ebooks that will offer readers around the world an excellent reading experience. I pulled in two heavy hitters, and we're going to spend time nerding out about EPUBs, focusing on tips and tricks that every author and small publisher should know. I myself am not an EPUB expert, so I'm going to try to keep this conversation on track, as easy to understand as possible, but my guests today are experts. So first is Simon. Hey, Simon.
Hi.
Simon Collinson is Manager Content Sales at Kobo, where he's responsible for analysis and forecasting of the company's content sales business. But before he joined us here in Canada, he freelanced as an ebook developer and worked at Canelo in London as a digital editor. And Ben is the Manager of Content QA and KWL Operations. Heyo.
Hello.
And he is Kobo's expert on all things, why doesn't that book look right on that device? I like that. He does not design ebooks or the software that displays them, but he is responsible for producing guidelines, reviewing customer feedback, and working with developmental teams, industry experts, and publishers to maintain and expand Kobo's level of ebook support. Yeah. So I think between the two of you, we can really get into some interesting advice here. So maybe we should just lay the groundwork for anyone who might not know, what is an EPUB?
Do you want to start?
I think Simon is better to start that. And let me say first, though, that the funny thing about ebooks is that almost no one is an expert on the whole spectrum of producing publications, making them digital in EPUB, designing them, testing them, and writing the software that this stuff gets served up on, and testing them. So I feel like it's sort of unique in the sense that everyone has this sort of insecurity about, I don't know if I'm really an expert on this space because I don't know about X, but that's just because there's so many components to it. And so my expertise is on testing content, and again, why doesn't this look right on that device? And I know how to look at a file, figure out what's wrong with it, and get it to the team that needs to look at it and say, hey, can we fix this? Or here's what I think is wrong with it. And I can get back to people who make them and then explain the technical limitations or requirements to them. And then Simon is kind of an expert on production, but not anything sort of past production, at least, not yet in terms of how do we build support for X.
Yeah.
So we're kind of experts in our own little niches, and then what I find is to get what you need to do is you need to glue 4 or 5 people together to get anything that represents expertise of the entire ecosystem of ebook design, production, support, and so on.
Yeah, it's exactly like saying nobody is an expert in print books, right? So you have people who are experts in printing or in design or in typesetting or whatever, but it's a similar division of labor, I think. And I think the reason it's a little bit fuzzy maybe is because ebooks have only existed in a commercial way for 10 years now. At the first few years, those roles were all blurred and generally handled by one person. Usually it was the person in the company who was the most tech savvy, or if you were an indie author, you had to kind of figure this stuff out for yourself. So in the course of my career, I've been making ebooks for probably about 5 years now. I've seen the tools available become a lot more sophisticated and a lot more mainstream, and I think that's a really exciting thing. And yeah, my career has kind of revolved around how do we make books that are as good and as beautiful as possible while working across the many thousands of different types of device people might want to read them on. So yeah, and as Ben says, my expertise is kind of on the production side of things, and the problem with that is that it is constantly changing. And I was making some notes for this on Friday and realized that there are a whole bunch of different production techniques and programs that I hadn't even tested because I've been out of the game for 6 months now, and that's a long enough time in the ebook world that actually things change significantly. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff happening. But we didn't actually answer your original question, did we?
Well, I asked you to answer it.
Because okay, Ben asked me to answer it and then went on and rambled. But I think the reason we didn't want to answer it is it's actually a little bit of a difficult question, right? Because it has changed over time. I think the simple reductive answer that I always give people is it's like a website in a box. So, and actually it's moving more towards that direction, I think it's fair to say. Would you say? With the way the ebook spec is moving, but basically it's like a series of web pages that are in a kind of a zip file. They're compressed in a kind of archive format, and they have certain special files within them that tell the reading system, as we call it, which means like your e-reader or your phone or your computer or whatever. These special files tell the reading system what is in the book and how it relates to each other, and that's basically getting simpler and simpler, hopefully. But yeah, it basically will, in theory, an ebook should be able to support pretty much anything a website can do. In practice, that differs a lot. So there's things like interactivity and so on that aren't really supported.
Yeah, I'd just say it's a simple website zipped up and called EPUB instead of .zip, and then in 99% of cases, that content contains something you'd call a book.
Yeah.
And in a way, we are, when you think back to maybe early 2000s, mid 2000s, when it wasn't uncommon to have an internet experience where you'd go to a website and then it would say, click which browser you're on and we'll send you to the website optimized for that browser. So then, because the website, knew it couldn't have one version of itself that would work on Netscape and Internet Explorer, so it was like, you just tell us what you're using and we'll point you to that website. And ebooks in some ways are still kind of in that state where publishers do have to do, in some cases, some customization, and not all of the platforms, so Kobo has Android, iOS, e-ink, desktop, Windows, they all behave a little differently. It's pretty uniform, but then if you add in another retailer's set of apps or an app that isn't something like Redium or Adobe Digital Editions, you just get this range in how content displays. So again, like websites, simple websites zipped up, but that are not intended for browsers, but intended for reading systems that have all these sort of niche features that browsers do not have.
Yeah, and I think the key point that I want to get across, hopefully, is that I think probably if you wanted to make an ebook 5 years ago, you had to learn more than most authors would want to learn about this sort of stuff. When I started learning how to make ebooks, I taught myself. There were no courses, there was very little documentation. There was a book, there was a great book called Accessible Epub 3 that was available. That was about it. There's a lot more resources now if you want to learn to do the hard stuff yourself, but I think it's fair to say that we're not so much like the way the internet was in the early 1990s. We're more like the internet in the late 1990s or the early 2000s. I don't know if that joke makes sense to anyone except web developers, but if there are any web developers listening, you'll know exactly what
They're
I mean.
rolling on the ground right now.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Please don't injure yourselves.
So thinking about EPUB history, could you explain to me what the different numbers of EPUB mean? That's something that I don't know.
Let me start, and then Simon, you can tell me where I'm wrong. So EPUB 1, I'm going to leave that one alone because there kind of wasn't EPUB 1, or it was sort of the things that are inside EPUB but just loose and running wild.
It started out with this thing called the Open eBook Publication Standard, which is still, there's like a vestigial little element of that in some old ebooks. It's like, that was pre-EPUB. I'm too young to have worked on that.
As am I.
Yeah.
We're all very young.
Yes.
And so EPUB 2 is let's take that stuff and wrap it up and make it more of a standard, and that's the one that took off and was successful. And in Kobo's store today, the majority of it, of what we have in our catalog, is EPUB 2. Even the majority of what we get today is EPUB 2, although that's changing. There's another thing we call Epub Fixed Layout, which was never part of the official spec, but basically, so fixed layout content is, if you haven't seen one, imagine you're looking at something on a tablet and what you're seeing looks like a print layout. So comics, a comic book, a kid's book, a cookbook, where you can't resize the text or change the content that you can with most ebooks, but you can pinch and zoom. So that came out. Essentially, what happened is the spec wasn't ready. Publishers and retailers wanted to do it, so we kind of had this unofficial spec. We get very, very few of those today. Then we have EPUB 3, which was an improvement on EPUB 2, so involved or adopted HTML5 and CSS3, which is essential for a lot of accessibility features. It had official support for fixed layout, which we call EPUB 3 fixed layout, an improvement to how tables of contents and navigation is done, and that's what most publishers who are good at making content do now. EPUB 3 now is about 30% of our incoming content. We wish it was more. We're always encouraging people to do more. Simon could probably know more maybe about the specific differences with EPUB 2 and EPUB 3.
Yeah, I mean, they are somewhat similar. EPUB 3 is trying to move more towards where the web is. So it's sort of trying to use... The HTML5, I think, is one of the most important parts of that because it uses sort of a more modern set of HTML tags that have more, like we say, semantic information. So instead of just saying, this is a piece of content, this is another piece of content, the HTML knows this is the sidebar that has additional information, or this is the horizontal rule that's like a section break in the content. So it kind of encodes more meaning about the document, which means that it's better for people with screen readers, and it's just kind of generally more navigable. So that's one of the main differences. It also supports other stuff like scalable vector graphics and a lot of things that probably aren't relevant to most people. So we don't want to go too deep into the
weeds. We're off the rails.
Yeah, but basically, if you have a choice between making EPUB 2 and EPUB 3, go for EPUB 3 because it is going to last the test of time a little bit better. EPUB 2 is starting to break in some cases, I think.
Yeah, maybe the simplest way to put it is EPUB 2 was the industry getting together and successfully putting together a spec that allowed people to get books into packages that could be sent to retailers, that could be sold to customers. That was the first version where we had a format that made this whole system work. And then EPUB 3 is sort of other parties coming to the table and saying, okay, it's great we did this, but you didn't think about my content. So you didn't think about my comics or Japanese content, or I need this added to the spec because what I'm doing is was not captured in what you had to do before.
Yeah. So working backwards from there, I guess, how does an EPUB get made? If there's, I'm an author listening, I have my Microsoft Word doc, and I want that to be readable on all devices that support EPUB. Where do I start? What tools do I need?
As I said earlier, there are a lot of different options that you can take. depending on a couple of things like how comfortable you are using, more complicated tech, how much control you want over your book. So generally it's sort of a sliding scale between like, all I want to do is have my manuscript, my Word document, my scribe in the document, whatever, and I just don't want to worry about anything. I just want it to output an EPUB. On that end of the scale, you've got stuff that will automate the process for you most of the way. Maybe you have to do a little bit of tweaking here and there. You can do that. You can go all the way to the other end of the scale, which is I can write every line of code in the ebook myself. I can handcraft it. I can have it do all kinds of crazy stuff. That is the kind of end of the spectrum where I've done a lot of my work, and it's expensive and time consuming, but it can be really fun and interesting if you're of a technical bent.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in the middle of that, and probably more towards the former end of that spectrum, I think most people will find themselves. So there are a lot of tools now that will output an EPUB just kind of as an export option. So like Apple Pages does it, Google Docs exports EPUBs, Scrivener exports EPUBs, I mentioned before. So those will all basically give you like a one-click export.
Mm-hmm.
And the quality of the code underneath it will vary. So some of them will display better on some retailers than others, but for the most part, if your book is fairly simple, you'll get something decent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the baseline level. There's a bunch of online tools that are really good. So like Pressbooks is a really good tool that I'm sure a lot of KW authors would be familiar with. Smashwords has a tool they call the Meat Grinder, which is a very, very affectionate name. Reedsy, I'm sure a lot of people will know Reedsy. They've just launched a tool which looks really good. And I think Draft to Digital have a tool as well.
Yeah.
So there's the kind of online tools, and I think some of them will offer you a level of customization that you can have. They'll do all the coding work in the back end, and you don't have to worry about anything except kind of the content. And then if you want a little more control, you can, if you want to use InDesign and do a print book, you can get an EPUB out of InDesign. It's hard to get a really good EPUB out of InDesign, but it's easier to get a crappy one. So, that's fine. And then there's kind of, if you're feeling a lot more adventurous than that, there are some command line tools that you can use. There's one called Pandoc that I recommend a lot. It's an open source tool that if you're comfortable with the command line and coding like that, then you can convert back and forth with different formats. You can go from Word to whatever. So that's kind of the scale, the spectrum. But ultimately, all of those tools are doing the kind of the collation for you and saying these are the different chapters, these are how they relate, building your table of contents, building your metadata document, doing all the stuff that is fiddly and technical and not really best suited to be done by a human for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add to that is that, so at the beginning, we're talking about how it's my job to like, hey, why doesn't this look the way it's supposed to on this device? And so what will happen is in my job, let's say something comes up and you get a book where all of the words are, missing, or the text is really small or something like that. If it's something we haven't seen before, what we do is we pull that EPUB from our system and we crack it open and just look at the HTML content files in a text editor. And when you do that, you can tell not necessarily which tool the file was made with, although in some EPUBs it will actually imprint, this was InDesign version whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you can tell right away looking at it what degree of automation went in there. So there's some files where you open them, it's just a wall of text, it's all in one line, and you gotta do some heavy editing and add in your own line breaks where you can read stuff or figure out which tag is where. And so those files, they may look fine on the device, although they're more likely to cause issues. But when I or any other human is trying to make an edit, it's way harder to edit files made in some programs than others.
Yeah.
Because they're just getting your code in the book and they're making it display, hopefully the way you want to the user, but they are not designed with the needs of someone who may be opening and editing that file in mind at a later date.
Yeah. And I think it's also a question of your long-term career, right? And and I think it's worth taking the time to research and pick a tool that gives you what we would call a clean output that doesn't have too much extra fluff in the file. And so, because the formats do change, and it's not like a print book where you're likely to have a PDF that you'll be able to reprint 20 years down the line. 20 years from now, the EPUB spec might look very different, and so you kind of want the simplest, cleanest version of your book to exist now in the hope that it will reduce the amount of work you have to do to maintain it in future.
Right.
And one of the things that we see a lot, and I'm constantly bugging Ben's team when I'm reading books, is I see books that were made cheaply 10 years ago when people were in a hurry to make a lot of ebooks. Often this is large publishers who had huge backlists to convert. They did it cheaply, they did it in my opinion, they often did it badly, and so it means that now people like me are coming back to them and saying, hey, your book's broken and I want you to fix it, because a print book published 10 years ago might have gone out of print, but ebooks never go out of print. So there's a lot of really interesting challenges that come from how do I make this content kind of viable in the long term. But I wanted to mention, I totally forgot on the list of programs that I was mentioning, a special mention for Vellum, which is a great tool that I've used. I think we probably recommend it, or I don't know, I've seen a lot of authors using it with great success. It's a really, really nice tool for making ebooks, and from what I've seen of it, it makes really nice, clean output. So I would recommend people investigate that.
That's awesome. So we have a great recap of tools. We'll list all of those in the show notes. And you had also mentioned one book that you really liked in the beginning. Is there a more recent book or resource that someone starting off learning this stuff might look to? So
there are a lot of good resources online. I know I haven't read it yet, but Jane Friedman's just released a new book on being an indie author, so maybe there's something in there. She's got quite a few resources on her website. There's also a great website by a guy called The Book Designer, which I think you just have to Google like how to make an EPUB, where he kind of goes through that spectrum that I mentioned of like more easy, more technical, and gives some good advice there. So I think there's a lot of good advice just kind of on Google. The other place to go is if you're having a technical problem. There's a lot of us who hang out on a Twitter hashtag called eProduction. So that's EPRDCTN. So it's like eProduction with all the vowels taken out of it. But that's the place to go if you have any kind of technical query. There's lots of ebook professionals hang out there and chat there. So that's kind of a good place to go for specific advice. And if you have a specific problem about some bug that you've come across, often you'll be able to get help there.
Has that hashtag ever been trending on Twitter?
Yeah, I think it has. Sometimes we have a conference here in Toronto every year, which I think sometimes gets trending, So,
cool.
We're an active
group.
Bunch. Yeah, absolutely.
It's also a fun place for petty arguments, disputes. Simon and I have been kind of bantering there a lot lately, and just being petty. It's fun. Everyone should join.
It's like it's like being back in high school, really, where you can form alliances, and it's great fun. Anyway, let's move on before we sound too nerdy.
It's too late for that.
We lost that a long time ago, Simon. Okay, so in this process, now we have tools, we have some resources. So let's say ePub is getting uploaded, and that's kind of where it passes over, Ben, to your area of expertise. So where do things start to break at this point? Like, what are some common errors that you see, and what are some things, mistakes that could be avoided?
Sure. So the first thing I was going to say, I'll get to a list in a second, but if you're listening to this podcast and you're an author, hello authors, hope you're enjoying your podcast break.
We love you.
Yep. And this is going over your head, and you're thinking, I just want to write books. Why is this so complicated? The one thing I would recommend you do is whatever you're using to make EPUBs, if you're paying someone, if you're using a program, if you're making them yourself from scratch in a text editor, do yourself a favor, and before you distribute it, or if you already have, just take one of the books you already distributed and just throw it on a few devices. So there's a bunch of programs that will run right on your computer. There's a Windows, Kobo has a Windows 10 app. We also have a desktop app for Mac and PC. Redium has a Chrome app that you can use. The Microsoft Edge browser now supports ePubs, so you can just open up an ePub in Microsoft Edge, which is kind of cool. If you have a tablet or a phone of any sort, you will be able to find a way to get an ePub on there, either through the Kobo app. Again, there's a Redium app, other apps, Adobe Digital Editions. So there's no shortage of things you can throw an ePub onto, and what I would suggest is don't feel obligated to do all of them, but pick a few and throw your ePub on there. If you can't figure out how to get on there, Google the instructions. We have instructions online on how to sideload content to all of our apps and devices. We'll add that link. and just see what it looks like. It looking a little different is fine, but does anything look horribly wrong with your EPUB? And if you've done that with 2 or 3 of your books, and just check for anything obvious, and you think, okay, if I'm the reader and I bought this, I would be happy with how it looks on this device, you've probably already done more than most authors, and you'll save yourself trouble downstream, or you'll save yourself in advance the issue of having users open your book on a device after they bought it and not be able to read it. And make sure the device you're looking at, there's a bit of diversity. It's not all Android or iOS that you just mix up a little bit, and I recommend 2 or 3 at a minimum. Common things we see is files where most of the content has been put in one HTML, or EPUBs where all of the content is one HTML file. So something probably went wrong in your conversion or the tool you used, and you had some 500-page print book, and that then sits in one file in your EPUB. So that will become a performance issue on devices like e-ink. It's a real nightmare in terms of navigation. We've seen some cases that are rare, but where it gets even worse, where you have the cover image inserted into the same file as all of the content. So you've got your cover and then hundreds of pages of content in one file.
So it's basically all in one chapter, right?
Yeah, and so our e-ink devices, that will actually make it, basically we have this display mode that we apply just to the cover to make the cover fit the screen nicely, and then that will do it to the rest of your content. So when we find those, we actually have to fail them because you can't adjust the text at all.
If you're using hopefully this is an example of something going badly wrong. If you're using a decent tool, this shouldn't happen in theory, right? Like if you're using one of the modern tools that we recommended, you hopefully shouldn't run across these issues, but sorry, I interrupted.
Another big one, it's more editorial, but previews loaded instead of full files. So if you're making a preview file and you're sending it, or maybe you're sending it to enable the pre-order and then later sending your full file, make sure you send the full file and make sure that's the one that gets loaded in. We see that far too often. Tables of contents that are not well formatted or non-existent, or that don't link up properly, so again, just check that yourself. If you do fixed layout, and I know not too many of our Kobo Writing Life authors do, although some of you do, test that on twice as many devices as you would have with your refillable book, because fixed layout support has gotten better and it's getting more uniform, but there's still way more ways that can break. Fonts, sometimes you embed a font but you don't do it quite right. Or if you have a font that you really feel like users need to read your content in that font, add a note at the beginning so they know how to adjust it.
But my advice is there are lots of technical and legal issues with embedding fonts, and I would avoid doing it unless you feel you absolutely have to. Reading systems have lots of really nice fonts on them these days. Most of the time the reader is going to have picked their own font anyway, so whatever you've picked is probably going to be overridden by the reader choices. So and a lot of the time when you buy a font, the license won't let you embed it anyway. So don't breach the font licenses. But the other thing I would say is don't then take that advice that I'm giving and say, oh, okay, I'm going to render on my text as images, because then that's just as bad. The images look terrible, they don't zoom, they're not always accessible. So generally just put the text in there, trust that the reader knows what to do with it, and don't try to exert as much control over the design as you would if you were designing a print book, I would say.
Great advice.
And then file size, don't make your EPUB huge unless you can really justify it. Every once in a while you get a question of like, hey, can we send an EPUB that's up to a gig? And yes, you can, or it has been done in the past. We can load that onto device. It will download to a user's account. But why? There's very rarely a need to have a file that big. And so if you're doing it, think about, is this multiple books? Do I need to link to something online? Can I really justify making users download obscenely large files and sync them to their accounts?
Yeah. So I still have a small number of freelance projects that I work on, and one of the projects that I'm working on now is a geology book, which includes a lot of high-res images, charts, graphs, maps, a lot of complex structural elements, 3 or 4 levels of heading. It's a long book, it's got a lot of pictures in it. Even with all of those images, I think there's like 300 images in this book. I've managed to get it to about 100 something megabytes. So that's still really big for an EPUB, because the thing is, you need to remember that, loading a 150 megabyte file on a phone is not a fun experience for anyone. Even if you've got a new phone, it's going to cause it to sputter a bit. And try to be empathetic and thinking of not like not every reader is sitting there in their like home office with fiber broadband and reading on a whiz-bang new device. There's a lot of people who are trying to read your content on a device that's 5 years old, or on a phone that they inherited from their grandkids, or so on and so on and so on. So
15,000 photos of their own children.
Exactly, yeah. It's like try to imagine the broadest possible range of applications for your book, because that's where it's going to be read.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that's kind of hard to get your head around initially, because particularly if you're like us here at Kobo, you probably have a newish computer, you have, you're working on, your phone or whatever.
Yeah.
But you have to think of it in terms of progressive enhancement. That's like a bit of a buzzword in the web design world, but imagine that your book was stripped back to the basics, no images, no nothing. Does it still work as a text if it were just the HTML content? And hopefully a lot of the time, if you're just writing a novel or something, it's relatively easy to do that. If you're writing something more complex, that's harder. But good design practices will ensure that it kind of degrades gracefully.
Yeah.
If you have images in there, make sure that you can view them on a tablet or a smartphone or any device. Avoid putting text in your images whenever you can. If you absolutely have to, make sure it's high res enough that you can read them. And colors. There are some cases where maybe you do need to have colored text or colored backgrounds, but think carefully about that. Color does not translate well to e-ink, especially background color. And you want, most ebook readers just want text that is the color they're accustomed to seeing. So if you're drinking that, really ask yourself if it's worth the trade-off in usability.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned resizing images. That's actually the inspiration for this episode. It's the reason we're all sitting here together. So you were able to teach one of our authors how to resize an image file. I don't know if that's an easy thing to really summarize vocally. If not, you say so and we can write it in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, resizing, like image manipulation and image handling is its own whole thing. And then actually I gave a talk about this a few weeks ago at the eBook Craft Conference with my old boss from Canelo. Again, it's one of those things where there's a spectrum of options. So if you prefer to work in a tool like Photoshop, there's options available for that where you can resize images. But if you have 100 images in your book and you just want to reduce them all in size by 20%, and you're comfortable, again, if you're comfortable using the command line or using like an automated tool, I'd recommend looking into, there's a tool called ImageMagick, which is really a very, very powerful sort of image processing library that is available for all major operating systems. The one that I use that's macOS, I think it's only macOS available, but it's called SIPS, S-I-P-S, and stands for Scriptable Image Processing something or other. I don't know what the S stands for. But basically you can say to SIPS, there's a really short command that you can do. You can say go in and resize all of these images so that they're a maximum length of 2,000 pixels on the longest size. And so you can, the longest side, so you can basically just go in and it will resize all your images for you if there's hundreds of them. It's something you have to be careful with because you can often, it's irreversible. So, make a copy if you're using command line tools, always make a backup of your work. But, if you want to do this kind of thing, there are lots of like open source tools that are really, really good. And there's lots of advice on this stuff as well. Like I said, the eProduction hashtag, come and chat to us, and there are lots of people who will be very happy to advise. Because, there's nothing that those of us in the ebook production community like better than seeing people spend love and care on this kind of work, because your readers will really appreciate it. I think it's easy to underestimate how bad a bad ebook can be for the reader, and I think you kind of owe your readers that consideration to try and give them as good a reading experience as possible. So.
For sure. Did we get all your tips and where things break?
I just had one additional tip, which is that if you are in a position where you are looking to pay someone to make you an EPUB, even if you have the simplest needs and you just, maybe you have a series of mystery novels or something like that, ask them a few questions to see how good they are at handling content. So ask them if their tools output to EPUB 3, which is a trick question. The answer should obviously be yes, but if they say no, that's a flag or red flag. Ask them about accessibility and good markup and descriptions in the code for images. Ask them about how they handle academic content, or if you had something that's was very design heavy, a lot of text boxes or tables, how they would handle that. That may not be relevant to your content at all, but that will tell you if the people you're talking to know their stuff and are invested in making good content that's going to be working on someone's devices 5 or 10 years from now.
Yeah, and I think the point about accessibility deserves some expansion. It kind of follows on from what I was saying before about giving all of your readers a good reading experience. Don't assume anything about your readers. Don't assume that they're sighted. Don't assume that they have, don't assume that they have any kind of accessibility that you would take for granted necessarily. So you need to think about how the content will render if it's read out by a screen reader, for example, or if the images, if somebody can't perceive the images. So, and there's a really good tool that's just launched for that. It's called ACE by Daisy, and it's basically, again, it's a command line program at the moment, but they're working on building a graphical user interface, and basically you can run your EPUB through that, and it will tell you if there are any major problems with the kind of accessibility content in it. So that helps a lot, because it will just show you the obvious issues there. Again, if you're outsourcing this work, definitely ask them if there are any accessibility accessibility tools that they can use.
Yeah.
We've seen in general, just over the past year, and we've been talking about a lot lately, just a big industry-wide initiative with regards to accessibility. For at least the past 4 or 5 years, it kind of seemed like a thing that would come up at talks and conferences, or you'd see blog posts, and everyone had this feeling that, like, yeah, we're going to have to do that at some point, to all of a sudden the conversation has really shifted into, we should do this thing now, or I'm already building this thing now, or here's this tool that inspects your EPUBs, or we'll be hearing from a major publisher who is changing the way they make their files. So, again, if you're just an author making your own files, this is nothing that is going to change your whole day-to-day. But again, that's why any tool you are using, or anyone who you're paying for to make you EPUBs, ask them how they're making accessible content, because that will tell you how tuned they are into the trends and what everyone's working on.
Yeah, and again, this is about future-proofing your work, because there's a lot of this movement, I think, is coming because the Marrakesh Treaty has recently come into force in some countries. So that's basically trying to make content more available to people who need it. And so it's getting to the point now where a lot of jurisdictions are starting to mandate that libraries and other big institutions only buy accessible content. That's kind of on the horizon, and that means that if you're in a position, like, say, I see a lot of publishers out there with hundreds of books in their backlist where they aren't necessarily accessible. They may find themselves in a position in the coming months or years where all of a sudden a library system says, gee, really sorry, big publisher X, but we're no longer permitted to buy your books because they're not accessible.
Wow.
And so, it's not necessarily going to happen like right this second, but there is a trend towards in the US, there's a lot of legislation around this, and
right.
I think it's probably going to get to a point where a lot of libraries can only purchase books that are accessible. So you kind of want your books to be right up there.
Absolutely.
And ready for that when it happens.
Yeah, and it's great to have that in your mind when you're creating the EPUB to begin with. And it's one of the best... it is a great asset of digital reading, right? Like that accessibility is kind of built into it, that you can do interesting things with fonts and for dyslexic readers, and all of that can be coded into the device versus having all these different print formats of books. Yeah,
absolutely. I used to be a print bookseller in Australia a couple of years ago, and we had customers who would come in and search through the large print books every week, and they would find there was nothing new for them there because it was such a limited market. And for those people now, any book is a large print book, and I think that's kind of magical, really.
Yeah.
I don't mean to toot our own horn too much or anything, but it's something that you may not realize about your readership, is that a lot of them may rely on those accessibility features. So, keep your readers happy.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's get into some other best practices or guidelines for getting good EPUBs out there. Are there other tips and tricks that each of you have learned along the way that our authors should keep in mind?
Well, I think that's a good
big
question.
one.
I think Ben's point from earlier, which is test it on as many different devices as you can, is a good one, because you just never know why something might break. And I think if you feel like you've tested it on a few different devices, then that at least gives you some peace of mind. Like, I know this works fine on my iPhone. I know this works fine on my Android phone. Fine. I don't know. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that, really. Just, don't feel like you need to look at every single file you make on every single device.
Yeah.
But not many people do anything at all. A lot of people just, they use a service, they find somebody to make their file, they hit distribute, and then they just hope for the best. And in an ideal world, that's all you would have to do, but we're not there yet.
We're not in that ideal world yet. And I think, it's both a good and a bad thing that the bar is relatively low still for making a great ebook. I think it's relatively easy to make something that stands out from the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was talking to a KWL author just the other day who put together one of the best ebooks I'd ever seen, and he'd done it using some of the software that we were talking about earlier. And I think I said to him, this book looks better than 95% of what comes out of big commercial publishing houses. So there's a lot of advantage to putting in that little bit of extra effort.
Sure.
But also, the community is really friendly. I'm going on about the hashtag a lot, but seriously, anyone is welcome to come and talk to us about this, and we will help. We love seeing indie authors succeed, because it's a great thing.
Yeah, that's cool. So Simon, you personally keep doing some side projects in addition to your Kobo work. Why do you enjoy this aspect of the business to the point that you are essentially working a second job?
Well, I think it's one of these fields that changes very quickly, and I want to keep my skills sharp. That's part of it. It's also partly because I enjoy the work, and I enjoy, I don't know if anybody listening to this podcast has done design work or done typesetting work, but it's a similar sense. It's not a million miles away from the sense that the author has, maybe, of I made this thing and it exists and it's out in the world and it will be there forever. Mm-hmm. I do print typesetting as well, and that's a really rewarding thing, and I still do that. It's a really fun thing if you're of that bent, I think. And it's nice to be able to say, oh, look, there's a book I made 5-6 years ago. People still buying it, still reading it, still enjoying it. So it's a nice, practical, hands-on thing. In a weird way, for a digital file, it's not hands-on at all, but it feels that way.
Yeah. And is there any specific moment you can remember, solving a tricky situation or creating a really unique EPUB that you're like, wow, I'm really proud of this specific product?
Yeah. The reason I say try and keep things as simple as possible is that when things get more complex, things can fail in really weird ways. So the most complex ebook I've ever done was a series of conference papers that were put together into a book. They had lots of hyperlinks and fancy design, images. They also had videos embedded in them with little video players.
Yeah.
And this is something I would advise nobody should ever do. Putting video in ebooks is technically possible. It's not a good idea. Basically what happened was I had the videos in an InDesign file. I exported it, and something changed in the way InDesign handled the export, and so the video, the controls for the video were covered by an invisible layer that you couldn't click through. So I would try and test this book on my iPad, and the video would play, but I couldn't pause it or rewind it or do anything. And it took me about a week of troubleshooting to figure out, oh, there's this little thing that's being added that is just stopping me from getting at the content. Yeah. So I fixed that. The book was working fine last time I checked on it 5 years ago. I haven't had the nerve to check since. But no. So that was an unusual one. But I think I think for the most part, keep it simple, and don't try to do fancy stuff like I did, because your content doesn't need it most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, great advice. And Ben, you have a really unique position where you've been with Kobo essentially since the beginning. How many years now?
Well, I'm still a very young person.
Yes,
so.
well, we've established that
Yeah.
for sure. So in
Ben's
case
like
there were
in his
any
late teens, you know.
yes, at the latest.
It's, I mean, some would say it's been almost 9 years.
Some might, depending on your unit of measurement. Are there any specific moments in Kobo's growth and your role on the Pub Ops team where you've caught some kind of interesting failure or fixed something in a way that you felt was super unique or exciting?
Sure. So one thing that we never would have thought about or come across had we not set up this process is that we had an issue that we've since fixed with night reading. So I want to say this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We added a feature. We now have it on iOS as well, but we first added it on Android, where customers can report on books within the book reading experience. So if you're a Kobo user on Android or iOS and you're reading a book, if you hit the options button in the top right on Android, I think it's the same spot on iOS. If you hit that, it will generate an email. It will grab some metadata from the book, like the font size, the book location, font being used, operating system of the device. Nothing secret, and it puts it all in the email so you can see it. And then you can write in a little comment to say, hey, chapter 12 is gone, or this book is upside down, or whatever. And so we turned that on years ago, and we didn't know what we would get. We didn't know how many reports we would get. It turned into a daily process where we review all of these, and we're doing so in part to help provide customer service, but mainly we're just looking for broken content because our customers are actually our best source of indicating to us which books need our review and attention and which ones we need to pull and report to the publishers. But the interesting thing when we turned that on that we started seeing was issues users were having where they'd be reading a book in night mode, which is where you just invert the colors. So instead of black text on a white background, you see white text on a black background. And you would get to parts where the users would just say everything was blank or had been blotted out. So you'd get to a chapter and all of a sudden you would just see white bars, white horizontal bars. So what it turned out is that there were some EPUBs where the CSS was specifying a background color of white. So I doubt anyone was doing this on purpose or, opening their EPUB and saying, hey, it'd be great, a background color of white, because that's usually the background color. But certain programs were probably doing this, and the people making the files probably didn't know that. And we didn't know that until we got this feature and started getting, not infrequent reports from our users to say, where's my book? And then the customers wouldn't think to turn off night mode just because customers in general don't experiment with settings in the book as much as you would think, and they don't experiment with things the way I do. I see something wrong and I will tap 12 buttons before I even realize I'm doing it to see what I can change. So eventually we fixed this just by having our app ignore that background setting in night mode. But that was just something that was happening not infrequently that we never would have seen coming until we turned that feature on. So and I'm pretty confident there are not things that are happening in content that we have no idea now, because I think anything that's happening in significant numbers we'd hear about from our customers, or we'd find it through QA, or Simon would tell me one morning, he said, hey, this book I'm reading is broken, can you do something about it?
Yeah.
But it's just a good example of the sort of thing you wouldn't think of when you're producing your file. So, hey, should I check to see if the background colors do strange things on night mode? So there's always something that you just would not have thought about until it comes up.
The takeaway is test on night mode. Like I read in night mode a lot, and I think generally books look the worst in night mode. So if your book looks okay in night mode, you're doing fine. Generally, but most of the time when I send Ben a report of something that I'm reading that just frustrates me too much, and I want to send back to the publisher, it's because I'm reading it in night mode and they've never tested it or looked at it in that sense. So
awesome. I feel like we've covered a broad range of topics. Is there anything else that, if you had started from the beginning and you're like, I wish I'd known that when I started working on EPUBs, or an author very new to this process should keep in mind we haven't talked about yet?
I was just maybe a thing that might be interesting for people to think about is I was thinking today about when I was so as discussed, I'm a young person, but I'm just old enough to have used a personal computer when they didn't all have Windows or some other graphical user interface installed on them. So when I was, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 or something like that, I knew how to do a bit of DOS programming. So Windows didn't exist, and so I knew how to, change a directory, make a folder, move something, inspect something, open a program. The only reason I taught myself that was because I wanted to play Hangman or Battleship or chess or something like that. And then a few years later, Windows came along, and I forgot how to do all of that stuff. And there's some people where you throw them in a technical problem like that, and they get really excited and they dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And then there's people like me who figure out the minimum I need to know to play Battleship, and then I forget about it.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of our authors out there now, I imagine that you're kind of split into two camps. The camp for whom this is causing a great deal of anxiety, where you're thinking, I just want to write and send my book to people and have them read it. Why do I need to know anything about production? And the reality is that you need to know at least a minimum amount about it for the time being until these problems are all solved by the industry. And then there's the other part of you, the other half of you, or probably much smaller than half, but the other segment of you, who, you get a little taste of this and you think, oh, I do want to know how to make an EPUB in Pandoc, or I do want to know how to, embed a video or change a font or things like that. But for that first group, no one really knows when, but eventually this will pass. Eventually knowing how to make an EPUB and optimize for all platforms will be sort of like knowing DOS programming.
Yeah.
But because we don't know when we're going to get there, I would recommend that everyone teach themselves a minimum amount of what an EPUB is and what it looks like inside and how to test on a few platforms.
I think it will be within the next couple of years, honestly. I think the tools that we have now are getting pretty close, and they're getting pretty good. Like, I was talking about Vellum before. I've never seen a program that sophisticated for making ebooks before. The online tools that are available are actually really good. And so I think we are getting pretty close to that stage where you can just upload a Word document to your preferred distributor and they will handle most of the conversion for you. You look at their web interface and say, oh, this chapter's wonky, whatever. Make a few fixes. It'll spit something out. I'm the caveat there is that I'm mostly thinking of straight text, like novels and stuff. If you're doing something a bit more illustrated or like a non-fiction book of some sort, you're always going to have a little bit more of a challenge. But yeah, I think for the most part these problems are pretty close to being solved. So it may not feel that way if you're deep in the middle of like a formatting nightmare, which, that's fine. Come and talk to us at eProduction, we'll help you. But yeah, I think it's getting close.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking some time to share insight with our listeners. We have lots to put in the show notes. I see Ben's raising his hand, so he's got one last thought. Let's do it.
I know I'm not the host, but I thought we'd close it with some listener mail.
Oh.
Listener mail. All right.
It's not really mail, but we got a tweet.
Okay.
So I thought that would be fun.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
So Lopter Sign, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, said, when are writers going to become more interactive when it comes to ebook formatting? Think Choose Your Adventure. I'm working on creating a class to teach this concept to writers, starting with the scripting language Inc. We'll post that link later. But I don't know when that's going to happen, but one thought I have is that I think over the years we've seen kind of a lack of experimentation where people start to look at EPUB and think, what can this format do that other formats can't? We see a lot of, I've done this in, this thing I put on the web, or I've done this in print, why can't I do it in EPUB? But not a lot of like, what cool things can I do in this? Like a choose your measure, which has been done, not all that often, but it has been done. So I think there's a lot of room for experimentation in terms of just like playing with the format, putting different things in there. The idea I've had for a while that I think would be interesting is if you're an author and you have a following and you can think of some campaign this would work for, one of the neat things you can do in EPUB that I've never seen done is you can embed things in there that wouldn't be visible from the reading experience. So you could put in a secret chapter, you could put in a video, you could put in a link to something, you could put in an image. And if you make your EPUB DRM free, so allowing users to download it and pick it apart, then you tip them off to maybe something was in there, they could do that and find the contents in there, and then there's all kinds of things you do with that.
Yeah. And I think there's lots of scope for this to happen in the coming years. I think my caution about that would be don't add interactivity or this kind of thing just for the sake of it. It's got to serve the story, obviously.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of gimmickry within the kind of digital publishing world, and I think, yeah, you got to make sure that it actually serves some purpose in the story. And and use it wisely.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
test.
Test it. Yeah.
Test on multiple devices and in night mode. I like it. All right, thank you guys so much, and we have lots for the show notes. We'll catch you next time on the KWL podcast.
Thanks a lot, Chrissy.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the KWL podcast. As always, we're so grateful for your support, staying with us and downloading every other week.
And if you learned something or felt something today, we'd really appreciate your coming by and leaving us a review on the podcast listening app or platform of your choice.
Yep, thanks for that plug, Ben. It really does mean a lot to us, and it's the best way for you to show your support of this podcast. And next episode, I'm going to be chatting with Scott Bintz. He was the founder of realtruck.com. It's a bit of a departure from our typical interviewee, but he built his business into a really huge empire in a short amount of time, and then took some of those lessons and put them into a book on leadership, which was really interesting. And he self-published that, so he talks about both sides of that business and what he learned from self-publishing. We hope you'll join us next time for another episode of the KWL podcast. Bye! Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we provide insights and stories from leaders and experimenters in the world of self-publishing. If you want even more information about growing your Kobo sales, check out our blog or find us on social. And if you're just finding us and ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing! Do a tune, Ben.
Da da na da na da na 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 da na da na da na 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 da.
Excellent.